Fog did strange things in river towns. It didn't roll in like weather. It arrived like intention, slow, patient, practiced, sliding off the black water and climbing the streets until every porch light became a fading coin and every sound felt closer than it should have been. The town called it the river breath. Locals said you learned to live with it, the way you learned to live with coal dust in your lungs, or the way you learned to pretend you couldn't hear the train anymore. Officer Ethan Cole didn't pretend. He walked those streets like a man reading a page written in invisible ink, looking for the words that only showed up if you held them to fire. It was after midnight, the kind of hour where honest people were asleep and the rest were either lost, hiding, or hunting. A thin glaze of frost clung to windshields and telephone lines. Somewhere beyond the fog, the river kept moving like a dark animal, patient and unstoppable. Ethan's breath came out in controlled bursts, not hurried, not calm in a casual way, calm like a gun safety, deliberate, practiced, never assumed. He moved down the cracked sidewalk near the abandoned rail spur, gloved hand resting near the radio clipped to his jacket. The street lamp ahead buzzed, casting a weak pool of sodium light that the fog swallowed at the edges. His boots made almost no sound. He liked it that way. Most of the department didn't understand why he volunteered for night sweeps when he wasn't on a scheduled rotation. They assumed it was ambition or stubbornness or some macho need to be the guy who showed up when nobody else wanted to. They were wrong. Night was the only time he could breathe, not because he loved darkness, but because the day was full of noise. Daylight came with meetings, paperwork, small talk, and the constant effort of wearing a face that looked normal. At night, the world narrowed into essentials: movement, sound, scent, distance, intent. At night, he didn't have to pretend his brain wasn't a machine built to catch what others missed. And he missed one thing once. One thing that made every other thing matter. 2 years ago, no, longer than that. The memory had lost its edges the way wounds did, but it never stopped hurting. A child, a call that came in too late, a door that opened onto nothing but an empty room and the kind of silence that screamed. He had been the one sent. He had been the one who arrived. He had been the one who looked under beds and behind doors and found only the absence. No one put the blame on him. The reports didn't read like it was his fault. The supervisor didn't say the words. But Ethan carried it anyway. It changed how he walked through the world. It changed how long he stayed at a scene. It changed the way he listened to a neighborhood dog barking, the way he watched a car idle too long, the way he couldn't walk past a shadowed alley without checking it twice. Because the worst thing about that old case wasn't the tragedy. It was the thought that maybe there had been a moment, a single small sound, a single weak sign he could have caught if he'd been more vigilant. And once you believe that, you never stop paying attention. Tonight, the fog made attention harder. It softened shapes. It bent distance. It made the world look like it was holding its breath. Ethan passed a boarded-up convenience store with a faded sign that still read, "Open," even though the windows were plywood and graffiti. He checked the alley to the side without turning his head, reading reflections in the broken glass of a bus stop. Nothing. He continued toward the rail spur. The rails used to haul coal down from the mountains decades ago. Now they were rusted lines disappearing into the fog, flanked by weeds stiff with frost. Past the spur, the ground dropped toward a service road that ran along the river, then climbed into a shadowy stretch of earth where old tunnel entrances cut into the mountain like scars. Ethan had walked that perimeter more times than he could count. The tunnels were sealed, mostly collapsed, and posted with warnings. But warnings didn't stop desperate people, and they didn't stop predators. He paused near the edge of the service road, listened. The town was quiet enough to hear the distant hum of a transformer and the steady drip of water from a gutter somewhere unseen. His radio crackled once, static, then went silent. He exhaled, and then, faintly, he heard it. Not a voice, not a footstep, a sound like nails scraping concrete. A frantic, uneven scratching, fast, then slower, then fast again, buried beneath the low rush of water. Ethan's whole body tightened. He stood still, letting his senses triangulate. The sound came again, sharper this time, and threaded through it was a noise so small it almost didn't exist. A whine, thin, high, desperate. Ethan moved. The fog thickened as he descended toward the service road. Frost made the ground slick, and the air had that iron bite that said the river was close. Water ran in a narrow channel beside the road, fast and dark, fed by runoff from the mountain. The town's storm drains swallowed the water in spaced concrete mouths along the roadside. The scratching came from one of them. Ethan crouched near a drain half hidden by dead leaves and a broken pallet. The concrete opening was wide enough to fit a person's shoulders if they forced it, but the grate had been bent back long ago. The runoff surged into the darkness with a hungry sound. He angled his flashlight beam inside. The light knifed through the wet gloom and caught a pair of eyes, amber brown, wide, and panicked. A tiny shape pressed against the back wall of the drain, water up to its belly, shivering so hard it looked like the creature was vibrating. A German shepherd puppy, too young to be out here, too small to survive long, in cold runoff. Its paws scrabbled uselessly against slick concrete. Ethan's stomach turned. "Hey," he said, voice low, not soft like comfort, soft like focus. The puppy whined again, a thin thread of sound, and tried to climb toward him but slid back, claws scraping concrete in frantic little bursts. Ethan scanned the area without standing. His light flicked across the road, the fog, the shadowed weeds. No movement, no footsteps, no immediate threat. But something in him refused to label it safe. He reached into the drain. The water was colder than he expected, a shock that bit straight through his glove. The current tugged at his forearm like it wanted to pull him in. The puppy recoiled, then recognized the hand as help, and surged forward with all the strength in its tiny body. Ethan's fingers closed gently around the puppy's scruff and ribs. The pup was lighter than it should have been. Thin, too thin. As Ethan lifted, the puppy kicked wildly, slipping. Ethan adjusted his grip, bracing his other hand against the concrete lip. His flashlight rolled, beam wobbling across the drain mouth. The puppy's back paw snagged on something, wire maybe, and the pup yelped. Ethan tightened his hold. "Easy," he said, though it wasn't for the dog, it was for his own chest, which had gone tight in a way he hated. He pulled harder. His gloved palm slid on wet concrete. Then pain flashed hot through his hand. A rusted metal edge, hidden beneath the waterline, sliced through the glove and bit into skin. Ethan didn't swear, didn't flinch. He just clamped down and lifted again, using the pain as fuel. The puppy came free with a wet slurp, and Ethan hauled it out of the drain, cradling it against his jacket. The pup's whole body shook. Its fur was damp and spiked, black and tan smeared with gritty runoff. Its ears were still half-folded, too young to stand properly. It pressed its muzzle into Ethan's chest like it knew warmth lived there. Ethan checked the puppy's breathing, fast but steady. He felt the ribs under his glove. He didn't like how easily he could count them. He stood, turning his flashlight in a tight circle. Still no movement, no one stepping out to claim the puppy, no owner calling, no headlights, just fog and the river and the sound of water continuing to run like nothing had happened. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second thing was the collar, a thin, weathered strip of leather, too worn for a puppy, too big for its neck, cinched down with an improvised knot. A metal tag hung from it, dull with age. Ethan's heart gave a strange, hard beat. He shifted the puppy to one arm and used his injured hand to flip the tag over. Blood had already started to seep from his palm, dark against his glove. He aimed the flashlight. The engraving caught the light. Ethan. For a second, his brain refused to translate it. Like his eyes had captured the letters, but his mind didn't want to accept them. He stared until the shape stopped being random scratches and became his name, his actual name, stamped into cheap metal as if the world had decided to say it out loud. Ethan's throat went dry. The puppy whined, feeling the tension in his body, and nuzzled harder into his chest. Ethan forced his fingers to turn the tag. The reverse side was scratched, more worn than the front, as if it had been rubbed by something for a long time, but the words were still there, faint, uneven, like a message someone had wanted to survive. Don't let him vanish again. Ethan went still. The fog seemed to press closer. The river noise rose in his ears. His breath sounded too loud. Him, not it, not this, not the dog, him. Ethan stared at the message until his eyes hurt. His mind tried to do what it always did, categorize, rationalize, build a chain of evidence. Coincidence? Someone found an old tag. The puppy got it by accident. But his name? And that phrasing? His chest tightened with something that wasn't just fear. It was the feeling of being watched by the past. Vanish again. Ethan's memory did something ugly then. It pulled up the image he worked so hard to keep buried. A child's bedroom, empty, a stuffed toy on the floor, the sound of his own radio crackling uselessly as he realized time had already stolen the outcome. His hand clenched. The wound in his palm stung, grounding him. The puppy's heartbeat fluttered against his chest. Too fast, too fragile. Ethan didn't know what the message meant, but he knew what it did. It grabbed him by the throat and made a promise on his behalf. Not again. He tucked the tag inside his jacket, shielding it and the puppy from the cold air. Then he turned and headed back toward the county substation, moving fast enough that his boots started to crunch louder on frost. The fog swallowed him like it had been waiting. The county substation wasn't much. 2 rooms, fluorescent lights that always flickered like they were thinking about quitting, and a front desk that smelled faintly of old coffee and printer toner. It sat on the edge of town, where the asphalt turned to gravel and the hills rose like a wall. Ethan pushed inside, letting the door slam shut behind him. Warm air hit his face. Not cozy warmth, mechanical heat that dried your throat, but it was enough to stop the puppy's shivering from worsening. He set the puppy gently on a folded blanket on a chair. The pup tried to stand, legs wobbling, and Ethan steadied it with a careful hand. "Stay," he murmured, not expecting obedience, just needing the word in the air. The puppy looked up at him, not with the blankness of an animal that didn't understand, but with a kind of raw, searching focus, as if it was reading Ethan the way Ethan read streets. Ethan's chest tightened again. He turned away before that look could do something to him. First priority, medical assessment. He keyed his radio and requested Dr. Lena Moore, who was already in the area working a consultation with the Bureau on a separate matter. Lena wasn't a veterinarian. Her world was forensic science, but she'd grown up around working dogs and had the steady hands of someone who didn't panic when life was fragile. While waiting, Ethan cleaned his palm in the bathroom sink. The cut wasn't deep, but it bled enough to remind him he was human. He wrapped it with gauze from the first aid kit and flexed his fingers. When he returned, the puppy had curled up in a tight ball on the blanket, eyes half closed but still tracking Ethan's movement, like it didn't trust sleep. Ethan understood that. The door opened, and Dr. Lena Moore stepped in, shrugging off a coat dusted with damp fog. She was brilliant in a way that didn't announce itself. Sharp eyes, quiet posture, an introspective calm that made people either trust her instantly or feel like she could see through them. Her gaze landed on the puppy and softened. "Oh," she said, as if the world had just done something unfair in a small, specific way. Ethan kept his voice level. "Found him in a storm drain near the rail spur." Lena moved to the chair, crouching beside the puppy without rushing. She let the pup sniff her fingers. The puppy trembled, then licked her knuckle once, as if deciding she was acceptable. Lena's mouth tightened with focus as she began checking the pup. Gums, ears, paws, the line of the ribs. Her hands were careful, efficient but not cold. "He's underweight," she said. "Dehydrated, cold stress. But—" She listened to the heartbeat with a small portable stethoscope she'd pulled from her bag like she'd expected to need it. "Strong rhythm. He's hanging on." Ethan exhaled a fraction. Lena frowned as she examined the collar. "This is too worn for him. Look, see the abrasions on his shoulders?" She angled the puppy gently. "These aren't from the drain. They're consistent with crate contact, repetitive rubbing." Ethan's jaw tightened. So he was transported. Lena nodded and placed. Ethan stared at the puppy's thin legs. The idea of someone carrying this animal, intentionally putting it in a storm drain, made his stomach harden. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the metal tag. Lena's eyes flicked to it. "You already checked it?" Ethan didn't answer the question directly. He handed it over. Lena tilted it under the fluorescent light. The engraving caught, clear enough. Her brows rose. Then she flipped it. "Read the back." Her face went still. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Yeah." "This isn't new," she said, voice careful. "Look at the wear, the oxidation. This tag's been around longer than this puppy's been alive." Ethan's hand curled around the edge of the desk. "So someone reused it," he said. Intentionally, Lena confirmed. Ethan swallowed, throat tight. Why? Lena didn't guess. That was what Ethan valued about her. She only spoke what she could support. I can tell you it wasn't an accident, she said, and I can tell you the puppy wasn't lost. He was delivered. Ethan looked down at the puppy. Delivered, like a package, like a message. The substation door opened again, and cold air swept in with Captain Maria Hayes. Hayes wore leadership the way some people wore armor, pragmatic, composed, never wasted motion. She had the kind of empathy that didn't get sentimental. It just made her fair. She took in the scene in one glance. Ethan's bandaged hand, Lena crouched by the dog, the tag in Lena's fingers. "What's this?" she asked. Ethan straightened. "Found the puppy near the rail spur." Hayes's gaze sharpened. "And you brought it here instead of logging it as evidence with county animal control." "He was freezing," Ethan said. Hayes didn't dismiss that, but her expression stayed firm. "Ethan, if this is connected to something criminal, and it looks like it is, chain of custody matters. You know that." Lena rose, holding the tag out. "Captain, this tag is older than the puppy. Someone placed him deliberately." Hayes took the tag, read it, and her eyes narrowed. "Don't let him vanish again," she murmured. Ethan watched her face for any flicker of recognition. There wasn't one, only calculation. Hayes looked at Ethan. "This hits close to home." Ethan didn't flinch. "That doesn't make it less real." "It can make it less clean," Hayes said. "Not cruel, just honest. Your judgment can get compromised when the case starts talking in your own voice." Ethan's voice dropped. "My name's on the tag." Hayes held his gaze. "Then that's even more reason you need distance." Distance. That word tasted like surrender. Ethan looked down at the puppy again. The pup's eyes were open now, tracking Hayes. Its body was still tense, but when Ethan's hand hovered near it, it pressed forward slightly, seeking him, like it had already decided. Ethan's chest tightened in a different way, less like pain, more like responsibility. Hayes sighed once, the closest she came to showing emotion. "Log it, photograph it, treat it like evidence." She paused. "And treat it like a life. I'm not saying abandon the dog, I'm saying don't let your guilt drive the steering wheel." Ethan nodded because he understood the rules, but understanding wasn't agreement. After Hayes stepped out to take a call, Ethan crouched beside the puppy again. The pup sniffed his bandaged hand, then licked the edge of the gauze, gentle, like apology. Ethan exhaled and let his fingers rest lightly on the pup's neck. "Shadow," he said, the name coming out before he could overthink it. Not because the puppy was dark, though it was, but because it moved like one, silent and close, and because Ethan knew what it was to live with something always just behind you. The puppy blinked, then leaned into Ethan's touch. Lena watched quietly. "You're imprinting," she said. Ethan's mouth tightened. "I'm stabilizing." Lena didn't argue. She just said, "Then do it right." Ethan did. He didn't scoop Shadow up and declare instant devotion like some movie. He did what he knew. Structure, calm voice, simple commands, safe boundaries. He filled a small dish with lukewarm water and dipped his fingers, letting Shadow lick droplets. He offered a soft piece of food, letting the puppy take it at its own pace. He guided Shadow through one basic instruction. Sit. Shadow didn't sit at first. Too anxious, too young. Ethan repeated the cue with patience, hand motion steady. Finally, Shadow's hindquarters lowered. Ethan didn't praise loudly. He just touched the puppy's chest gently and said, "Good." Shadow's tail gave a weak thump. Something in Ethan's stern interior shifted, just a millimeter. Later, while Shadow slept curled on the blanket, Ethan sat at the desk and did what guilt had trained him to do. Look for patterns. He pulled local reports, runaways, missing persons, welfare checks that didn't go anywhere. He didn't chase headlines. He chased inconsistencies. A teenager listed as voluntarily left home, even though the family insisted they'd never run. A young boy unconfirmed sighting near the river, filed and forgotten. A series of calls from a church outreach group about kids needing help, always around the same stretch of Riverside Service Road. Individually, they were noise. Together, under Ethan's eyes, they began to form a shape, a cluster, a pattern. And at the center of that pattern was a place labeled in community flyers as a charity drop site. Blankets, food, old clothes for anyone in need. Help that required no questions. Help that created crowds. Help that offered cover. Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked at Shadow sleeping. He looked at the tag. Don't let him vanish again. Ethan didn't believe in fate, but he believed in predatory systems, and he believed in warnings you ignored at your own cost. The next night, the fog returned like a habit. Captain Hayes had given Ethan a directive. Coordinate with county units, wait for proper authorization, don't freelance. Ethan heard her, he respected her. He also knew what waiting did. Waiting was how people vanished. Deputy Lucas Reed arrived at the substation just after dusk with an energy that felt almost out of place in the heavy air. Reed was competent. Hayes didn't assign fools to sensitive work, but he still had that rookie brightness, that belief that effort could fix everything if you applied it fast enough. He spotted Shadow first. "Is that a German Shepherd?" Reed asked, dropping his gloves on the desk like he'd been holding excitement in all day. "We got a K9 now?" Ethan's tone stayed flat. "Not way." Reed grinned anyway. "He's tiny." Shadow, now warmer and slightly less shaky than the night before, stood on uncertain legs and stared at Reed. Not fearful, assessing. Reed crouched, careful not to rush. "Hey, buddy." Shadow sniffed once, then looked back at Ethan as if asking permission. Ethan didn't nod. He didn't have to. Shadow returned his attention to Reed and allowed one brief ear scratch. Reed's grin widened. "He likes me." Ethan didn't correct him. Shadow didn't like Reed. Shadow was simply deciding Reed wasn't a threat. That was different. Ethan spread the reports across the desk. "We're staking out the drop site." Reed's energy focused. "Captain, sign off?" Ethan met his eyes. "We're observing. No engagement unless necessary." Reed hesitated, just a flicker, then nodded. "Copy." They drove out in an unmarked vehicle, headlights muted by fog. The town thinned into darker stretches, houses giving way to trees, then to open riverbank where the water moved like a black ribbon. The charity drop site sat beside an old lot with a sagging fence and a shipping container painted with a smiling sun and the words, "Donate here." A couple of dim floodlights hung from a pole, throwing pallid light across piles of bundled clothes and boxes. It looked harmless, that was the point. Ethan parked downwind, engine off. Silence rushed in. The fog muted the world. He kept Shadow in the back seat at first, secured and warm, letting the puppy acclimate to the sense without overstimulation. Reed watched through binoculars. "You really think someone's using this?" Ethan's eyes stayed on the site. Predators like places where people stop paying attention. Minutes passed. A lone figure approached, dropped a bag, left. Normal. Then another. Still normal. Ethan's mind stayed cold, counting time, noting patterns. He watched the way headlights approached and paused, how long engines stayed idling before doors opened. Then, near midnight, a vehicle rolled in slow, a dark SUV without distinctive markings, moving like it didn't want to be seen but didn't want to look like it was hiding either. It stopped near the shipping container. The driver didn't get out right away. Ethan's focus sharpened. "Reed," he murmured, "watch hands, watch doors." Reed adjusted the binoculars. "Copy." Ethan glanced back at Shadow. The puppy had been lying down, half asleep. Now Shadow was upright, not wagging, not curious, rigid. A low sound vibrated in Shadow's chest, more sensation than noise. Alarm. Ethan's pulse quickened. "You smell something," he whispered. Shadow's nose worked fast, nostrils flaring. The puppy's gaze locked toward the SUV, body tense like a wire pulled taut. Recognition. Ethan's skin prickled. He opened the back door just enough for Shadow to get fresh air while still secure. Shadow pressed forward, nose high, reading the wind. The SUV's door opened. A figure stepped out, hood up, face hidden by fog and shadow. No new characters entered Ethan's mind because the figure was simply unknown suspect, a silhouette in the night. The figure moved to the back of the SUV, opened it. Ethan's breath stalled. Someone shifted in the rear compartment. A muffled sound, not loud enough for Reed to catch immediately. But Ethan's body knew the frequency of fear. Shadow let out a sharp, sudden bark, high and urgent. The figure froze. Reed stiffened. "Did your dog—" "Quiet," Ethan snapped, already moving. The figure slammed the rear door and turned fast, scanning. Ethan stayed behind cover, but the damage was done. Shadow's bark had cut through the fog like a flare. The SUV's engine roared to life. "Go," Ethan said, voice tight. Reed lunged for his door. "We call it in!" Ethan was already reaching for the radio, but the SUV was moving. Reed ran toward the site anyway. Too fast, too exposed, trying to get a plate, trying to salvage something. "Reed!" Ethan barked. Reed didn't stop. The fog swallowed him. Ethan's heart slammed once. Then movement exploded from the shadows near the shipping container. Two shapes, fast, practiced. Unknown suspects. They hit Reed like a wave. Reed's shout cut off mid-syllable. Ethan's world narrowed. He moved, hand on his weapon, but the distance was wrong. The fog distorted everything. The suspects dragged Reed toward the SUV with brutal efficiency. Shadow barked again, panic and fury in one sound. The SUV peeled away, tires spitting gravel. Ethan ran, but he was seconds too late to intercept. He caught only the wake of exhaust and the fading taillights swallowed by fog. Reed's radio clattered to the ground near the container, forgotten. Ethan stopped, breath ripping in his lungs. His fingers clenched hard enough that his bandaged hand throbbed. He forced himself to breathe, to think. Shadow's barking had stopped. Now the puppy whined, a thin, urgent sound, pawing at the back door as if begging to follow. Ethan opened it. Shadow leaped down, small body, big intent, and immediately put nose to the ground, circling in tight loops, then locking onto a direction with startling certainty. Toward the mountain, toward the old rail tunnels. Ethan's radio crackled. Captain Hayes' voice cut through the static. "Cole, report. I'm seeing movement on the county feed." Ethan swallowed. His throat felt like sandpaper. "Reed's been taken," he said. "Unknown suspects. Vehicle fled toward the tunnels." A beat of silence, just long enough to feel Hayes' mind calculating risk. Then, "Hold position. Backup is en route. Do not pursue alone." Ethan looked at Shadow, looked at the dark line of the mountain in the distance, looked at the fog that could hide 100 sins. He heard his own memory whisper, "Too late." He heard the tag's message like a command, "Don't let him vanish again." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Cole?" Hayes' voice sharpened. "Confirm you're holding." Ethan stared into the fog and made the only decision his code allowed. "No," he said quietly. He clicked off the radio. Shadow started forward, nose low, already tracking. Ethan followed. The service road along the river narrowed as it climbed toward the mountain. The air got colder, sharper, the smell of wet stone and old iron rising as the ground changed. The fog thickened in pockets, then thinned, then thickened again, like the world was breathing unevenly. Ethan's flashlight beam cut a narrow slice ahead. He kept it low, angled to catch movement without advertising his position. His boots crunched softly over gravel and frost. Shadow moved differently than a normal puppy should. Not perfectly, he was still young, still wobbly in places, but there was purpose in the way he tracked, like his instincts had been switched on by something older than his body. Ethan's spine stayed rigid. He wasn't charging in blind. He was reading the environment, searching for signs, tire tracks, scuffed gravel, broken weeds. He found them. Fresh marks leading off the road toward a slope where dead brush and rusted fencing sagged against gravity. Beyond that, the earth opened into darkness, an old tunnel entrance, partially collapsed, warning signs bent and unreadable. Shadow reached it first and stopped, nose working furiously at the cold air spilling out. Ethan crouched beside him. Inside the tunnel, the dark wasn't empty. It felt occupied, by damp, by echo, by the memory of machinery and men who'd once worked underground. Ethan listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint. A metallic clink, a scrape. And somewhere deeper, a sound that made Ethan's blood go cold, a muffled human noise. Not a clear scream, not a word, just a small, trapped sound that carried the same helpless shape as the case he'd failed. Ethan's chest tightened. Shadow whined once, low, urgent, then looked back at Ethan, waiting, not pulling, not panicking, waiting for his handler to decide. Ethan's hand hovered over Shadow's head, steadying himself as much as the dog. "Okay," he whispered. "We go slow. We go smart." Shadow's ears twitched. Ethan stepped into the tunnel. The temperature dropped immediately, the air wet and heavy. His flashlight beam caught water dripping from the ceiling, glittering like needles as it fell. The ground was uneven, broken ballast, loose stone, puddles that reflected the light in shattered pieces. He moved carefully, placing weight slowly to avoid noise. Behind him, the fog remained outside like a curtain. Inside, the tunnel swallowed sound and returned it altered, stretched, misleading. Shadow moved ahead by a few feet, nose down, then up, reading not just the ground, but the air currents, the stale pockets where scent lingered. Ethan followed the line Shadow chose. His thoughts tried to intrude, Hayes's order, the coming consequences, the risk of walking into an ambush. He shoved them aside. He couldn't afford doubt. The tunnel narrowed. A section of collapsed beams forced Ethan to duck. He felt the ceiling too close, the weight of the mountain pressing overhead. Water began to run louder somewhere ahead. Shadow paused, sniffed, then moved left, choosing a side passage that split off from the main tunnel like a throat branching. Ethan hesitated for half a second, then trusted Shadow. They turned. The side passage was tighter, darker, with old cable lines hanging like dead vines. Ethan's flashlight caught broken boards and rusted tools half buried in mud. Then Shadow froze. Ethan stopped instantly, heart hammering. Shadow's body went rigid, nose lifting. Ethan listened. A voice, low, harsh, somewhere ahead, not close enough to make out words, but close enough to confirm. Suspects were inside. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He lowered his flashlight until only a thin spill of light remained, aimed at the ground. Shadow's breathing was fast but controlled. Ethan leaned close, whispering, "Quiet." Shadow didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply held still, every muscle intent. Ethan inched forward, slow as a breath. The passage opened into a wider chamber where the old tunnel had expanded. Maybe once a maintenance pocket. Ethan stayed behind a slab of collapsed concrete, peering around the edge. His flashlight was off now. He relied on the faint ambient glow from outside filtering through cracks, barely anything. But he could see shapes. A vehicle, dark, parked haphazardly, nose angled like they'd rushed in, two silhouettes moving near it. And then, Reed. On the ground, wrists bound, mouth gagged, eyes wide in the dim light. Ethan's vision sharpened so hard it felt like pain. Reed was alive, breathing, struggling. Ethan's body tried to surge forward. He forced it still. He counted. 2 suspects visible. Could be more unseen. The environment was unstable. Loose beams overhead, slick ground, water running somewhere close. Ethan's brain mapped risk like a tactical board. Shadow was pressed against his leg, trembling with contained urgency. Ethan breathed in through his nose, slow. He needed a moment. A window. A mistake. And as if the universe had no interest in giving mercy, one of the suspects turned sharply, scanning the passage. Ethan pressed back behind the concrete. Shadow's claws scraped once. Tiny sound, but in the tunnel it felt loud. The suspect's head snapped toward the noise. Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon. His blood went cold. A second voice, another suspect maybe, muttered something low. Footsteps started toward Ethan's position. Shadow looked up at him, eyes bright with fear and readiness. Ethan's mind flashed the tag again. Don't let him vanish again, like it was burned behind his eyes. He didn't move. He waited. Footsteps drew closer, crunching stone. Ethan steadied his breathing. And then, from deeper in the tunnels, there came a sound, faint but unmistakable. A soft, childlike whimper. Not Reed, smaller, different. The suspects froze. One muttered, sharp, angry. Their attention shifted, away from Ethan, deeper toward the sound. The footsteps stopped, then turned back. Ethan's lungs burned with held breath. He understood in that instant. Reed wasn't the only one taken. There was another captive presence here, unseen, unheard, until now. Proof Ethan's fear was real. Proof the tag's warning wasn't metaphor. Shadow's body trembled harder, reacting to that sound like a compass snapping to north. Ethan's jaw clenched. He couldn't wait for backup. Not now. Not with a second life fading somewhere in the dark. He looked at Shadow, barely visible in the dim. "Stay with me," Ethan whispered. Shadow's tail didn't wag. He simply pressed closer, as if answering without sound. Always. Ethan shifted his weight, preparing to move, silent, fast, decisive, and the ceiling above them groaned. A low, ominous creak. Dust sifted down like gray snow. The tunnel was unstable. The mountain didn't care about anyone's rescue plan. Ethan's heart slammed, because now time wasn't just an enemy. The tunnel itself was counting down. Ethan didn't flinch at the groan. He'd heard structures talk before. Old buildings, rotted stairwells, bridges flexing under weight. The sound was always the same, a warning delivered in a language nobody wanted to translate until it was too late. Dust fell in a thin veil. Somewhere above, water dripped steadily, indifferent. He forced his body to remain controlled. Panic was noisy. Panic got people killed. Shadow's paws shifted against the damp stone, claws clicking once more, tiny but sharp in the tunnel's acoustics. Ethan slid a hand down to steady the pup's chest, applying gentle pressure the way you calmed a bomb dog before a sweep. "Easy," he breathed. One word, no emotion, just instruction. Shadow's tremble eased into stillness, but the puppy's eyes never left the chamber. Ethan's mind ran 2 tracks at once. Track 1, Reed on the ground, bound, visible, alive. Track 2, the other sound, childlike, deeper in, hidden, meaning another captive presence. That changed the stakes from rescue my rookie to stop a pipeline. It made this bigger than pride, bigger than disobeying Hayes, bigger than Ethan's old guilt. But guilt was still there. It sat in his chest like a weight, not crushing him now, driving him. Don't let him vanish again. Ethan didn't believe the tag was supernatural. He didn't believe in prophecies delivered by metal scraps. He believed someone had wanted him here. He believed someone had chosen him because they knew exactly where to cut. He believed that, for once, his pain was being used as a lever. The suspects moved away, deeper into the tunnels, drawn by that whimper. Their silhouettes retreated, voices low and irritated, as if they were dealing with an inconvenient reminder that living cargo made noise. Ethan recognized that kind of irritation. It was the sound of someone treating a life like an object. He waited until their footsteps faded into the tunnel's wet echo. Then he moved. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He slid from cover and crossed the chamber in a low crouch, weapon angled down, finger disciplined along the frame. Shadow stayed glued to his left leg like a shadow that had learned to breathe. Reed's eyes widened when he saw Ethan emerge from the dark. Relief flashed across his face, then fear, like he remembered what Ethan's presence here meant. No backup, no perimeter, no safety net. Ethan didn't speak. Speech carried. He dropped beside Reed and cut the zip ties on his wrists with a small blade from his belt. Reed's hands jerked free, numb from circulation loss. Ethan immediately shifted to the gag, lifting it carefully from Reed's mouth. Reed sucked in air, coughing silently into his sleeve, eyes frantic. Ethan leaned close, lips near Reed's ear. "Can you move?" Reed nodded fast. Yeah, Cole, there's—" Ethan held up a hand. "Stop." Reed swallowed hard and forced himself into quieter breathing. Ethan pointed toward the side passage. Out. Reed's gaze flicked past Ethan, toward the deeper tunnel. His eyes tightened. He nodded again, but it wasn't agreement. It was desperation. He whispered anyway, voice scraped raw. "There's a kid. I heard him. They dragged him past me." Ethan's stomach tightened. He already knew. But hearing it from Reed made it heavier. Ethan's head tilted, listening. The tunnel beyond was quiet now. But quiet didn't mean safe. Quiet meant predators were thinking. Shadow's nose lifted, and the pup let out a soft, urgent breath like a suppressed whine. The dog's body angled deeper, not toward the exit. Ethan's pulse kicked. The tunnel groaned again overhead, louder this time. A small shower of grit rained down. Reed flinched. Ethan didn't. He looked at Reed, eyes steady. "You're going out." Reed stared at him like Ethan had spoken another language. "No, I'm not leaving with—" "You're going out," Ethan repeated, voice low and absolute. "You get to the mouth. You signal. You call Hayes. You tell her I'm in. You tell her where. You don't argue." Reed's jaw worked. He was scared, smart enough to be scared. But he was also a cop, and he hated retreat. Ethan leaned in one fraction closer, letting the weight of his authority settle. "Lucas, if you stay, you slow me down. If you slow me down, the kid vanishes. You want that on you?" Reed's throat bobbed. He shook his head once, harsh. Ethan pointed again. "Go." Reed clenched his fists, then nodded. He started to rise. Shadow watched Reed with wary eyes, then looked back at Ethan, as if checking. "You sure?" Ethan touched Shadow's neck once, a silent signal. "Stay close." Reed slipped toward the side passage, moving low, careful. Ethan watched him go until Reed disappeared into the dark. Now it was just Ethan and Shadow. And somewhere deeper, a child was making sounds like a trapped animal. Ethan's bandaged palm pulsed with pain when he tightened his grip on his weapon. It grounded him. Pain was simple. It didn't lie. He breathed once. Then he turned, following Shadow. Shadow didn't run. The puppy moved with a strange combination of youth and instinct, short steps, nose working constantly, pausing to confirm direction, then continuing. The passage narrowed, and the air thickened with damp. The sound of water grew louder, like a river running through a throat of stone. The ground sloped slightly downward, and Ethan's boots slid once on slick mud. He caught himself silently, adjusting his weight. Shadow paused at a fork where two dark corridors split like veins. The pup sniffed left, then right, then left again, and something in Shadow's posture changed. Less uncertainty, more conviction. Shadow went left. Ethan followed. The tunnel here felt older, more unstable. Wooden beams, blackened with time, braced the ceiling in uneven intervals. Rusted cables hung. In spots, the rock looked cracked, like it was thinking about collapsing. Ethan's flashlight stayed off. He used the faint ambient light that filtered in through distant cracks and the occasional glimmer from puddles reflecting nothing. He listened. Footsteps ahead, soft, voices, 2 suspects at least. Ethan moved slower, controlling his breathing. He had to close distance without being heard. He had to see the situation before he committed. He had to be the calm center of the storm. Then the whimper came again. Closer now. It was not a scream. It was something worse. Contained panic, as if the child had already learned screaming didn't help. Ethan's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. For a second, the old case tried to rise up again, dragging him back into that empty bedroom, that radio crackle, that feeling of arriving after everything that mattered had already happened. He crushed it. Not now. Shadow halted, ears pricking. Ethan crouched behind a mound of collapsed rock and peered around. The corridor ahead opened into a low chamber where water poured through a cracked wall in a narrow sheet, feeding a shallow stream that ran across the floor. A vehicle was parked there, same SUV, tires half sunk in mud. One suspect stood near the rear door, rummaging through something, rope, maybe, or a bag. The other suspect was closer to the wall, where the water ran, holding a flashlight. The beam jittered over the rock, then dropped to the ground, and there, half in shadow, half illuminated, was a small shape. A child, maybe 7 or 8. Hood pulled up, knees drawn tight, hands bound, face streaked with dirt and tears, eyes enormous and glassy in the dim. The child made a tiny sound, trying not to. The suspect snapped, voice harsh, and shoved the child's shoulder. The kid flinched, like pain was expected. Ethan felt something inside him go cold. Shadow's body tensed, a low growl bubbling up. Ethan pressed a hand to Shadow's chest, firm. "Quiet," he mouthed. Shadow trembled but obeyed, the growl collapsing into a vibrating breath. Ethan needed a plan. He was one man, one weapon, one puppy. No trained canine yet, not in the official sense. 2 suspects, unknown weapons, unstable environment. But the tunnel itself was an advantage if used right. Sound traveled, light betrayed, water masked footsteps. Ethan waited. He watched. The suspect near the child turned away for a second, distracted by the other suspects rummaging. The flashlight beam swung, briefly blinding the suspect's own vision. A window. Ethan moved. He rose in one smooth motion, weapon raised, voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Federal! Hands where I can see them!" Both suspects froze. The rummaging suspect jerked upright, hands half full of gear. The other swung the flashlight toward Ethan, beam flashing across Ethan's face. Ethan didn't blink. He kept the weapon steady, stance grounded, voice calm. "Drop it," he said. "Now." For a heartbeat, everything held. Then the suspect near the child lunged, not toward Ethan, but toward the kid. Ethan's whole body tightened. "No," he snapped, stepping forward. The suspect grabbed the child's jacket and yanked, dragging the kid toward the SUV like cargo. The child's bound hands scraped across rock, and the kid cried out once, sharp, involuntary. Ethan moved fast. He fired, not to kill, but to stop. The shot cracked through the chamber, echo exploding in the tunnel. The bullet hit rock near the suspect's feet, sending chips flying. The suspect recoiled, startled. Shadow barked, one sharp, furious bark that ripped through the air. The rummaging suspect recovered first, reaching for something at his waist. Ethan's mind calculated in a flash. Weapon. He fired again, controlled, striking the suspect's arm. The suspect yelled, dropping whatever he'd been reaching for. The child screamed then, a real scream, and the tunnel answered with thunderous echoes. Everything became chaos. The second suspect shoved the child toward the SUV and bolted in the opposite direction, toward a narrower passage, leading deeper. The injured suspect staggered, clutching his arm, eyes wide with panic and rage. Ethan kept his weapon trained. "Down! On the ground!" The injured suspect hesitated. Then the ceiling chose that moment to speak again. A loud crack. A beam shifted overhead, grinding like teeth. Dust and small rocks rained down. The stream of water surged as if the mountain itself had jerked. The injured suspect's eyes flashed with fear. He made a choice. He ran. Ethan didn't chase him. Not yet. He rushed to the child. The kid was shaking, sobbing, trying to pull away, even from rescue. Trauma makes the body distrust hands, even good ones. Ethan crouched low, lowering his weapon, voice softer but still steady. "Hey," he said. "You're okay. I'm Ethan. You're safe." The child stared at him like Ethan was a mirage. Shadow padded forward, slow and careful, tail low, ears forward. The child's eyes flicked to the puppy. Something changed, a tiny loosening. Shadow sat down a few feet away, not demanding, not rushing, just present. Ethan cut the child's bindings with the same blade he'd used on Reed. The rope fell away. The child rubbed raw wrists, crying harder now that the body could feel again. Ethan shrugged off his jacket and draped it around the child's shoulders, shielding them from the cold tunnel air. Then a sound made Ethan's blood spike. An engine. The SUV's engine coughed once, someone trying to start it. Ethan whipped his head toward the vehicle. The suspect who had fled deeper, no, the other one, must have doubled back. Or another suspect unseen was inside. Ethan couldn't confirm, but the sound was real. The headlights flashed, spilling light across the chamber. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The SUV lurched. It wasn't going to drive far in this mud, in this chamber, but it could drag the child with it. It could block the only passable route. Ethan's mind snapped to the constraints. No new characters, no new twists, just the environment tightening. He grabbed the child gently by the shoulders, guiding them behind the collapsed rock where he'd been hidden. "Stay here, don't move." The child nodded frantically, clutching Ethan's jacket like it was armor. Ethan looked at Shadow. "Stay." Shadow didn't, not fully. The puppy edged closer to Ethan, refusing to be left behind. Silent refusal, loyal instinct. Ethan didn't have time to argue. He moved toward the SUV. The engine revved again. Ethan saw movement through the windshield. A silhouette. One of the suspects. Ethan raised his weapon, voice hard. "Stop the vehicle! Hands up!" The SUV lurched forward a foot, then tires spun uselessly in mud. The driver cursed, the sound muffled but clear enough. Ethan advanced, closing distance. Shadow followed, low and quick, keeping to Ethan's side like a living tether. Then the ceiling cracked again, louder, deeper, and the world shifted. A beam overhead snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Rock and wood crashed down near the SUV's hood, missing it by inches. Water surged through the cracked wall, stream rising, pushing mud in rippling waves. The driver panicked. The SUV reversed, slamming into stone, then tried forward again. Ethan recognized the danger instantly. Structural failure. The chamber was collapsing. The gunshots, the shouting, the engine revving, vibrations in a fragile place. The mountain was giving up. Ethan's throat tightened. He had seconds. He spun back toward the child. "Move!" he barked, voice slicing through the chaos. The child stumbled up, legs unsteady. Shadow barked again, urgent, then ran to the child and circled once, as if hurting. Ethan grabbed the child's hand, small, cold, and pulled them toward the passage, back the way he came. Behind them, the SUV's headlights swung wildly. The driver abandoned the attempt, door opening with a sharp slam. Footsteps pounded, suspect fleeing deeper, choosing escape. Over capture. Ethan didn't chase. His mission was the child. The tunnel shuddered. A roar rose, water and stone and the collapsing throat of the mountain. Ethan ran, not reckless, focused, feet placing quickly, eyes scanning for falling debris. He kept the child close, pulling them through the narrowing corridor. Shadow sprinted ahead, then back, then ahead, small body moving like instinct made visible. The floor became slick with rising water. Ethan nearly lost footing once, but caught himself, tightening his grip on the child. The child cried, high and terrified. Ethan's voice stayed calm even as his body pushed harder. "Keep going. Don't stop. Look at me. Breathe." The child tried. The tunnel behind them groaned again, and something massive crashed. The sound echoed like thunder in a coffin. Ethan didn't look back. He pushed forward toward the fork where they'd turned earlier. Shadow reached the fork first and stopped, nose working fast in panic. The pup looked left, then right, then back at Ethan. Ethan's mind flicked. Which way out? The way Reed went? The way Ethan came? Shadow chose, without hesitation, right. Ethan trusted it. They turned, sprinting through tighter passage, the air colder here, the smell of fresh water stronger. Then light. Faint at first, then brighter. The tunnel mouth. Ethan's lungs burned. The child's sobs turned into coughing in the cold air. Shadow burst out first into the fog, barking once. Signal, alarm, life. Ethan stumbled out a second later, dragging the child with him. The night air hit like a slap. Fog wrapped around them. Frost bit their skin. But it was open sky. It was freedom. Ethan fell to one knee, pulling the child close, shielding them from the wind, scanning the perimeter with weapon raised. Headlights approached in the distance. Backup finally. And then Reed emerged from the fog, limping, face smeared with dirt but alive, radio in hand. Behind him, silhouettes of county units, and farther back, Captain Maria Hayes moving with purposeful speed. Hayes's eyes locked onto Ethan. No relief yet, no praise, just a hard, steady look that said, "You better have a reason." Ethan lifted his chin, breath coming ragged. He didn't need to explain the reason. The child in his arms was the reason. Shadow pressed against Ethan's leg, trembling violently now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go. Hayes reached them and crouched, gaze flicking to the child. "You got them out," she said, voice tight. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." Hayes's jaw clenched. Her eyes flicked to Ethan's radio. "Off." "You disobeyed a direct order," she said. Ethan met her gaze. "Yes." A beat. Fog thickened around them. The mountain behind them groaned, another collapse rumbling like distant thunder. Hayes looked toward the tunnel mouth, then back at Ethan. "You're going to write a report that makes my head hurt," she said. Ethan's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite. "Yes?" Hayes exhaled through her nose, the closest she came to releasing emotion. Then she shifted her attention to the child, voice gentler. "You're safe," she said. The child nodded shakily, clutching Ethan's jacket. Paramedics moved in, hands reaching, blankets unfurling. The child was lifted carefully, carried toward warmth. Ethan's hands felt empty immediately. Reed stepped closer, eyes wide, voice hoarse. "Cole, you—" Ethan cut him off with a look. Not harsh, just final. Reed swallowed, nodding once, understanding the unspoken. Later. Shadow leaned into Ethan's leg harder, pressing head against him, like anchoring. Ethan crouched and finally let himself touch Shadow's head with both hands, one bandaged, one cold. "Good," he whispered. "Good boy." Shadow's tail thumped once, weak but real. Ethan's chest loosened, just slightly, like a knot easing after years, but the tag's words still burned in his mind. Don't let him vanish again. Tonight he hadn't. Dawn came gray and thin over the river town. Fog still clung to the hills, but the air had shifted, the way it did after a storm passes and leaves everything raw and clean. Ethan sat in the substation, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at his own hands. The bandage on his palm was stained with old blood. He could still feel the tunnel's cold, the child's small hand, Shadow's frantic bark echoing off stone. Captain Maria Hayes stood at the opposite end of the desk, reviewing early incident notes without looking up. Deputy Lucas Reed sat nearby, with a blanket over his shoulders, sipping lukewarm coffee like it was medicine. Dr. Lena Moore arrived quietly, coat damp with morning mist. She took in Ethan's posture, rigid, exhausted, held together by will, and glanced down at Shadow curled at Ethan's feet. Shadow looked different now, still a puppy, still too young to be a full working canine, but something in his eyes had sharpened. The dog had been in the dark and come out still trusting. Lena crouched and checked Shadow's paws, quick and practiced. "He's okay," she murmured. "No cuts. Just stress." Hayes finally set the notes down and looked at Ethan. "Here's the reality," she said. "You violated procedure. You endangered yourself. You could have compromised the case." Ethan didn't argue. He just listened. Hayes continued, voice even. "And you saved Deputy Reed's life and recovered a child alive." Reed lowered his coffee, eyes flicking between them. Hayes's gaze stayed on Ethan. "There will be consequences. Administrative review. You don't get a free pass because your instincts were right." Ethan nodded once. "Understood." Hayes held his gaze a moment longer, and something subtle shifted in her expression. Not softness, but recognition. She understood what Ethan carried. She understood what too late did to a cop. "You're not allowed to make a habit of this," she said. Ethan's voice was quiet. "I won't make a habit of disobeying you." Hayes's brow rose slightly, as if asking for the rest. Ethan looked down at Shadow, then back up. "I will make a habit of not hesitating." A long beat. Hayes exhaled. "Fine. Put that in your report and let Internal Affairs enjoy the poetry." Reed let out a short, shaky laugh that sounded like relief. Hayes turned to Lena. "The tag?" Lena slid it across the desk in a small evidence bag. Ethan watched it like it was a wound. Hayes tapped the bag once. "We'll trace where it came from. It's not supernatural, Cole. Someone reused it for a reason." Ethan nodded. "I know." But knowing didn't change the feeling that it had been aimed at him like a finger pressed to his chest. Hayes's eyes flicked to Shadow again. "What happens to the dog?" Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "He stays with me." Hayes's expression hardened. "That's not a casual choice. A K-9 isn't a pet. It's a responsibility." Ethan's voice stayed level. "I'm not making him a pet." Reed leaned forward, unable to help himself. "Captain, that dog, he tracked like he was born for it." Hayes shot Reed a look. Reed shut up. Ethan continued, calm, disciplined. "He's an asset, and he's—" He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound like weakness. "A promise." Hayes's gaze held him. Finally, she nodded once. "Not approval, permission, conditional, professional." "Then you train him," she said. "Properly, controlled, you document everything. He doesn't become an excuse for you to go rogue." Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Hayes stood straighter. "And Cole," she paused as if choosing words carefully, "your guilt can sharpen your vigilance, but if it becomes self-destruction, I will pull you off the line. You understand?" Ethan's throat tightened. He forced the words out clean. "Yes." Hayes turned and left, coat swinging behind her like a final punctuation mark. The room quieted. Reed stared at Ethan, eyes red-rimmed. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Ethan's gaze stayed on the floor for a second, on Shadow's curled body. "Yes," he said, "I did." Reed swallowed. "Why?" Ethan didn't give a speech. He didn't explain the old case. Not now. He simply reached down and rested his hand on Shadow's head. Shadow opened his eyes and looked up at him. Ethan's voice dropped to something almost private. "Because I know what it looks like when someone vanishes, and I'm done living with that." Reed nodded slowly, the message sinking in. Lena stood, gathering her bag. Before she left, she paused beside Ethan. "The tag," she said quietly. "It got you moving. But you did the rest." Ethan exhaled, a long breath that carried months, years of held tension. Shadow pressed his muzzle into Ethan's palm as if sealing something unspoken. Ethan looked down at the puppy and felt, for the first time in a long time, something other than guilt sitting in his chest. A quiet, disciplined hope, not the loud kind, the kind that stayed. And with Shadow at his feet, Ethan knew the shape of his future wouldn't be defined by the case he failed. It would be defined by the ones he refused to. Redemption doesn't arrive like a miracle. It's built, decision by decision, when nobody's watching, when the dark offers you excuses, when procedure says wait, and your conscience says move. Ethan Cole didn't erase the past. He didn't get to. But he chose a different ending for someone else. And with K-9 Shadow beside him, he chose to never let hesitation write the final chapter again.